I never anticipated the knock on my door that afternoon would alter anything. I merely thought I was lending a hand to my neighbor's son, helping him carry a dilapidated chair up the flight of stairs. I certainly didn't expect the way his gaze lingered, or how my usually quiet living room suddenly felt too hushed, too intimately charged. And I absolutely didn't foresee that a simple act of neighborly kindness would blossom into a confession I hadn't heard in decades, that someone desired more from me than just a benevolent gesture. What began as an unremarkable day in our tranquil neighborhood transformed into a moment that compelled me to re-examine my age, my solitude, and what I mistakenly believed was an already finished chapter of my life. Before I begin, I have a small request for you. As you listen, please share in the comments which city and state you're tuning in from. I often picture faces behind the screen, and knowing your location makes me feel as if I'm conversing with cherished, old friends, rather than just this small microphone on my table. Anyway, my name is Evelyn. I'm 66 years old, and this is the story of the day I assumed he simply needed assistance. Yet my neighbor's son yearned for something far deeper. I reside alone in a modest little apartment on the second floor of an aged building, the kind with perpetually creaking stairs and paper-thin walls, where the faint murmur of your neighbor's television drifts through the night, and the plumbing groans in protest every time someone indulges in a hot shower. A majestic maple tree stands outside my living room window, and in the late afternoons the sun's rays filter through its branches, painting long golden stripes across my worn rug. On that particular day, I was comfortably settled in my favorite armchair by the window, a cup of lukewarm coffee resting on the small table beside me. Bills were spread out like a losing hand of cards, my reading glasses had slid down my nose, and my back ached in that familiar, nagging way it does when I've been sitting for too long. That's when I heard the knock. 3 swift, polite taps on the door, not the heavy, impatient kind, but hesitant, almost apologetic. I sighed, set my mug down, and pushed myself up with a small groan. "Coming," I called out. When I opened the door, there he was, Mark. He's my neighbor's son, the woman downstairs in apartment 1B, Sylvia. I'd watched him mature from a gangly teenager into a man. Somewhere along the way, he had developed broader shoulders, a more defined jawline, and those weary eyes men acquire when life has settled upon them with a little too much weight. He must be in his early 30s now. "Hey, Miss Evelyn," he said, flashing that shy, crooked smile of his. "Did I catch you at an inconvenient moment?" I shook my head and returned his smile. "Oh, please. At my age, there's no such thing as an inconvenient moment. Only awake and asleep. What's going on?" He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing down the hallway. I noticed then the old wooden chair leaning against the wall. The seat was cracked, one leg haphazardly wrapped with duct tape like a sorrowful bandage. "I was trying to bring this up to my mom's place," he explained. "And the leg almost gave out on me," he added. "I remembered you mentioned you enjoy fixing old furniture. Thought maybe you could, take a look if it's not too much trouble." I looked at the chair, then back at him, an amused expression on my face. "You're telling me you carried that thing all the way up here instead of just tossing it out?" He laughed, a low, warm, resonant sound. "It was my grandmother's. Mom won't let me throw it away. She said if anyone could salvage it, it would be you." Now I'll readily admit that touched a tender spot inside me. At my age, you don't often get called useful. People are more inclined to call you sweet or dear, and then gently guide you out of the way. "All right," I said, stepping aside. "Bring it in before it collapses in the hallway and we both get blamed for the ensuing chaos." He lifted the chair as if it weighed nothing and deftly slipped past me into my living room. I became acutely aware of the hushed quiet, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, and the soft echo of his footsteps on my wooden floor. He set the chair down carefully, and I quietly shut the door. For a moment, I simply observed him. The way his shoulders filled his gray t-shirt. The way his dark hair fell casually over his forehead. How he surveyed my apartment with a curious, almost gentle expression. "Place looks inviting," he said, turning back to me. "Cozy." I smiled, folding my arms over the cardigan draped around me. That's a polite way of saying small, but I'll graciously accept it. He shook his head. "No, I genuinely mean it. It feels peaceful in here." There was a particular inflection in his voice when he said that. I couldn't quite decipher its meaning yet, but I felt it like a subtle shift in the air. I walked over to the chair and ran my fingers along the cracked seat, the worn armrest polished smooth by years of hands and untold stories. "This thing has certainly seen better days," I murmured. "Kind of like us, huh?" he said lightly. I glanced up at him and he immediately looked a little embarrassed. "Sorry, I didn't mean—" I chuckled softly. "It's quite all right. I've got more years and more cracks than that chair, but I'm still standing." He smiled at that, and for just a fleeting second, our eyes met in a way that made me feel truly noticed. Not as a sweet old lady or a neighbor or someone's mother, but distinctly as a woman. It was brief, but it was undeniably there. I cleared my throat and crouched down to inspect the broken leg. My knees protested with a familiar ache. Before I could get too far, he bent down beside me. "Careful," he said, one hand hovering near my arm as if ready to steady me if I stumbled. "Do you need assistance?" "Only if you possess the ability to rewind time on these old joints," I replied playfully. Inwardly, however, I was strangely aware of his close proximity. I could feel his warmth, detect the faint scent of laundry detergent mingled with something like cedar on his skin. He chuckled, and I could feel his breath near my cheek. My fingers brushed the splintered wood and the old rusted metal screws. "I can fix this," I said finally, a note of certainty in my voice. "But it'll require a bit of effort. I'll need some wood glue, some clamps, and perhaps a stronger cup of coffee than the one I just abandoned." He stood up and extended his hand. I hesitated for half a second, then took it. His hand was warm, firm, and he pulled me up with an effortless ease that gently reminded me of how much smaller I had become over the years. When I was upright again, he didn't release my hand immediately. He held it for just a second too long. Not enough to be inappropriate, but enough for me to distinctly notice. "Thank you, Mark," I said softly, gently slipping my hand free. He blinked as if just realizing he was still holding on. "Oh, sorry. It's fine." I turned toward the kitchen. "I'll put on a fresh pot of coffee. You can help me move this chair to the corner so I can work on it by the window. That way I can see what I'm doing and discreetly spy on the neighbors at the same time." He laughed, a genuine hearty sound, and followed me, his footsteps soft behind mine. In the kitchen, I busied myself with the coffee maker. I could feel him leaning against the doorway, watching me. That feeling, being watched, being seen, was something I hadn't truly felt in a long, long time, in any way that truly mattered. "You know," he said quietly, his voice a gentle murmur, "my mom talks about you a lot." "Oh," I said, meticulously measuring coffee grounds. "That's either very flattering or very dangerous." "She says you've been good to her," he continued. "Says you bring her soup when she's sick, that you helped her fill out those complicated paperwork forms when she couldn't understand them. She says you're the only person in the building who truly listens." I paused for a moment, my hand still resting on the spoon. "She's my friend," I said simply. "That's what friends do." He was quiet for a beat. "I don't think people listen to me much," he added, almost under his breath. The coffee machine began its usual grumbling as it brewed, but his words cut through the noise. I turned to look at him. He was staring at the floor, hands tucked into his pockets, his jaw tight. "Mark," I said softly, using his name for emphasis. "What makes you say that?" He shrugged one shoulder. "I don't know. I guess when you're the one everyone expects to fix things, the car, the bills, the problems, they forget you might be falling apart a little too." There it was again, that quiet heaviness behind his casual tone, that weight I recognized because I've carried my own version of it, the burden of being needed, but not always truly seen. I poured the coffee and handed him a mug. Our fingers brushed again. It was nothing and something all at once. "Sit," I told him, nodding toward the small table by the window. "You can tell me more while I pretend I know what I'm doing with that chair." He sat down, the sunlight wrapping around his shoulders, giving him an almost ethereal glow. I pulled the chair closer and began meticulously examining it, tools spread out around me. For a few minutes we talked about trivialities. The weather, his job at the auto repair shop, the incessant noise from the construction down the street. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a faucet turned just a trickle at a time, the conversation shifted. He told me how perpetually tired he felt, about how his friends were getting married, having children, buying houses, while he was still struggling to help his mother pay rent, and constantly fixing the perpetually leaking sink. "It feels like I missed some crucial turn in life," he said, staring into his coffee. "Like everyone else has a clear map, and I'm just walking around guessing." I paused, one hand resting on the arm of the old chair. "You know," I said gently. I felt like that even in my 40s and my 50s. Sometimes I still feel like that now. He looked up surprised. You? Of course me, I answered, a soft laugh escaping my lips. You think hitting 66 comes with an instruction manual? Half the time I'm just as lost as you. I've just had more years to practice pretending I'm not. He smiled, but his eyes remained serious, searching. You seem so certain of yourself. I shook my head slowly. I'm not certain, I'm just honest about being unsure. We held each other's gaze. For a moment. It stretched on longer than a purely neighborly gaze usually does. There was that subtle charge in the air again, like the faint buzz before a summer storm. I cleared my throat and tapped the chair leg. Hand me that glue, please, I said. He passed it to me, his fingers lightly grazing my knuckles. I felt a small, unexpected spark. It startled me. I told myself it was just the heightened awareness of someone close, nothing more. But I'm old, not blind. I could feel something subtle shifting as I worked. He continued talking about how he sometimes felt utterly invisible. How he tried dating, but people his age seemed rushed, impatient, swiping left and right, like human beings were mere items on a menu. I miss when people just talked, he said, a wistful note in his voice, without their phones constantly in their hands, without trying to impress each other every second. I inhaled the sharp, familiar scent of the wood glue and carefully pressed the broken pieces together. Conversation is a lost art, I replied. But it's not gone. You just have to find people who still truly desire it. He was quiet again. When I looked up, he was watching me, not my hands, not the chair, but me. What? I asked, a little too quickly. He shook his head. Nothing, just you're easy to talk to, that's all. I felt a warmth creep up my neck. It had been a very long time since a man's gaze had made me self-conscious in that particular way. I suddenly became acutely aware of my silver hair pulled into a loose bun, the fine lines around my mouth, the faint age spots on my hands. You're kind, I said, looking back down at the chair, focusing on the task. I'm just old and have a lot of practice listening. That's not what I meant, he answered quietly, his tone holding a new depth. His tone made me pause. I looked up again. There was nothing playful in his eyes now, just a steady, searching warmth. What did you mean then? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He took a breath, as if deciding precisely how much to reveal. His fingers tapped a soft rhythm on the side of the mug. I meant being with you doesn't feel like work. I don't feel like I have to prove anything. I don't feel judged. My heart gave a small, unexpected thump. I tried to laugh it off, a forced, airy sound. Well, I'm too tired to judge anyone. That's one benefit of getting older. He smiled, but his eyes never left mine. No, he said more firmly, his voice unwavering. It's more than that. You look at me like you really see me. The words lingered in the space between us, creating an almost tangible presence. I swallowed hard. Of course I see you, Mark, I replied softly. You're a good man. A tired one, maybe, but a genuinely good one. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his thighs, his posture suddenly more intense, closer. The sunlight caught in his dark eyes, making them glint. Do you ever get lonely, Evelyn? He asked, his voice low and direct. The question landed like a small stone in a perfectly still pond, sending ripples through me. I opened my mouth, intending to deflect it with a joke, but the earnest look on his face stopped me. He wasn't asking casually. He was asking as if he desperately needed the unvarnished truth. Yes, I said finally, my voice coming out softer than I intended. I do sometimes. A lot, actually. He nodded slowly, dropping his gaze to his clasped hands. Me too. For a moment everything was quiet. The clock ticked its rhythmic beat. A car passed distantly outside, somewhere in the building. A baby cried and then, just as quickly, quieted. I didn't come here just because of the chair, he said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. My fingers went still on the wood. No? He shook his head. I mean, yeah, the chair needs fixing. And my mom, she really did say you're the only one who could fix it. But that's not the only reason I came up. I could feel my heartbeat quickening in my throat now, a frantic little drum. Why did you come up, Mark? I asked, my voice barely audible. He looked up at me, and this time there was no mistaking the raw intensity in his eyes. A potent mixture of vulnerability and something much deeper. Something that scared me not because it was dangerous, but because it was achingly familiar. I just wanted to be around you, he said quietly, his voice a near whisper. I've been thinking about you more than I probably should. The room seemed to subtly tilt on its axis. I gripped the edge of the chair a little tighter. "Mark," I whispered, my voice tinged with warning. "I'm old enough to be—" "Don't say it," he cut in gently, his gaze unwavering. "I know how old you are. You tell the mailman every birthday when he brings you those flyers." Despite everything, I let out a shaky, half-hysterical laugh. He continued, his voice firm. "I'm not confused, Evelyn. I know this is unusual. I know you probably think I'm just some lonely guy looking for— I don't know, but it's not like that." I could feel the tension rising, a slow, insistent warmth spreading across my chest. I wasn't offended. I was stunned. A part of me wanted to shut it down immediately, to stand up and make a dismissive joke, to send him home with his broken chair and a polite, final smile. But another part, the part that vividly remembered what it felt like to be desired, to be looked at like this, compelled me to stay seated, compelled me to listen. "What is it like then?" I asked carefully, my voice surprisingly steady. He took a slow, deliberate breath, searching for the precise words. "It's like when I see you in the hallway or on the bench outside when you're reading, I feel calmer. I want to talk to you. I want to hear what you think. You make me feel safe and seen. And I just wanted to be near that today." He looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening, perhaps feeling the weight of his own confession. "I know how this sounds. I know what people would think if they heard me say this, but I don't care what they think. I care what you think." I sat there, the glue drying on my fingertips, my heart beating faster than it had any right to at 66. The easy thing would have been to laugh it off, to gently scold him, to remind him of the many years between us, the relentless gossip that could swirl through a building like ours. But there was one more undeniable truth I couldn't ignore. I liked how his presence filled the room, how his voice softened when he said my name, how his eyes lingered, not with hunger, but with genuine, tender affection. "Mark," I began slowly, choosing my words with meticulous care, "what you're saying, it's not nothing, and I'm not going to pretend I don't hear it." He lifted his gaze back to mine. "But you have to understand," I continued, my voice gentle but firm. "I've spent a very long time learning to live with my own company, to be content with my routines, my quiet days, my little chair by the window. You walking in here and saying these things, it stirs up parts of me I'd already carefully folded away." His voice was barely above a whisper when he answered, "Maybe they don't have to stay folded." The profound intimacy of that moment was not about bodies or anything physical. It was about two people from vastly different chapters of life, sitting across from each other in the fading afternoon light, admitting their loneliness, admitting their profound desire to be truly seen. He reached out then, very slowly, as if offering me ample time to pull away. His hand moved toward mine on the arm of the chair. His fingers hovered just above my skin, close enough that I could feel the warmth, but not quite touching. "Can I?" he asked softly, his gaze holding mine. It was such a simple question, yet it carried the weight of everything unspoken between us. I looked at his hand, then at his face. I saw no impatience there. No pressure, just open, careful waiting, respect. I nodded just once. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. His fingers settled lightly over mine. Not gripping, not claiming, just gently holding. My skin tingled under his touch. I felt strangely shy, like a girl again, and absurdly aware of every wrinkle, every prominent vein on the back of my hand. "I don't know where this goes," I said quietly, my voice a breath, "and I won't rush into anything that hurts you, or me, or your mother. We can't be careless with this." "I don't want careless," he replied, his voice firm and steady. "I just want honest." We sat like that, hand in hand, the sun slowly sliding lower, turning the room a soft, warm amber. In that moment, there was no grand promise of anything more. There were no whispered declarations or reckless decisions, just the quiet, powerful acknowledgement that something profound between us had irrevocably shifted. I had thought he just needed help with a broken chair. I hadn't realized he was asking for something infinitely deeper, a chance to be seen by someone who truly understood what it meant to feel invisible. As the light faded and the shadows lengthened across the floor, I knew one thing with unwavering certainty: my life, as small and predictable as it had become, would not feel quite so simple after that day. And as his hand gently squeezed mine, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, the fragile, dangerous, exhilarating beginning of hope. The hours after Mark left that afternoon felt different, as if someone had subtly rearranged the furniture inside my chest. I kept touching my hand, the one he had held, and feeling that faint warmth, like the lingering imprint of something I wasn't sure I was allowed to miss. That night, I sat in my favorite armchair by the window, the maple tree outside whispering secrets in the breeze, and replayed every single moment. The way he looked at me, the tremor in his voice, that careful, almost reverent pause before he touched my hand. I hadn't expected any of it. At 66, you don't walk around imagining that anyone, let alone a man in his 30s, is thinking about you when you're not in the room. Life slows down. People get busy with their own lives, families grow, friends move away, and you learn to live with the quiet. But the quiet felt different now, like it wasn't quite as empty. Of course, I didn't expect to see him again so soon, but life, it seems, always has other, often surprising, plans. The very next morning, I was meticulously sorting through my drawer of mismatched screws and ancient tools, when another knock came at the door. Not the soft, hesitant one from yesterday. This one was firmer, more confident, yet still not demanding. When I opened the door, there he was again, Mark. Same shy smile, same tired eyes, same palpable warmth that seemed to emanate from him like a soft shadow. "Morning, Miss Evelyn," he said, holding a small paper bag. "You're awfully early," I replied, raising an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in my voice. "Did the chair collapse overnight and demand immediate attention?" He laughed, a deep, resonant sound. "No chair emergency. I brought you something." He lifted the bag a little, a gesture both simple and profoundly thoughtful. I stepped aside and let him in. He walked into the kitchen and gently placed the bag on the counter. Inside were 2 warm breakfast sandwiches from the charming cafe down the street, the one I adore but rarely treat myself to, always fretting about saving money. "I noticed you barely touched your coffee yesterday," he said, his gaze surprisingly astute. "Thought maybe you skipped breakfast, so I got you this." I stared at him, completely caught off guard. "You didn't have to do that," I murmured, my voice a little soft. "I know," he replied simply, his eyes steady on mine. "I wanted to. There are gestures that are small in scale but land deeply in the heart. At my age, thoughtful attention is far rarer than fleeting romance, and infinitely more meaningful." We sat at the small table by the window, the morning sun spilling across the floor in soft golden squares. He unwrapped his sandwich, then looked up. "How'd you sleep?" he asked. The question was so ordinary yet so intimate, it tugged at something tender within me. "Better than usual," I admitted, a genuine smile gracing my lips. He smiled at that, a slow, warm smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle with genuine pleasure. After breakfast, I moved back to the chair to continue my repairs. Mark stayed close, handing me tools when I asked, but mostly just talking. He told me about his father, a man who had left when Mark was very young, resurfacing only in occasional, infrequent phone calls that always ended with grand promises to visit and never materialized. He told me how incredibly hard his mother had worked, how he had grown up feeling an overwhelming need to be the man of the house before he truly had a chance to be a boy. He recounted how he had spent so many years tirelessly caring for others that he genuinely didn't know what it felt like to have someone truly care for him in return. The more he spoke, the more the raw, vulnerable truth unfolded before me. Mark wasn't looking at me because I was older. He wasn't drawn to me because of age at all. He was drawn to the profound sense of peace and understanding he felt when he was near me, safety, quiet, comprehension. And I realized something that made my chest feel both heavier and strangely lighter. I felt precisely the same when he was near me. Around midday, I took a well-deserved break and sank onto the couch. My knees were stiff, my hands sore from diligently holding the clamps. Mark sat down beside me, but he deliberately left a respectful, discernible space between us. Not far, but certainly not close enough for idle gossip to begin swirling. There was a moment of quiet, that kind of quiet that isn't awkward but full, pregnant with unspoken emotions, as if the air between two people is holding its breath. "Evelyn," he said softly, using my first name again, a small intimacy that still resonated. "Yesterday, did I say too much?" I turned to him. His expression wasn't bold or confident this time. It was uncertain, almost afraid, as if he had walked to the edge of an unknown precipice and wasn't sure whether he would fall or be gently caught. "No," I answered, my voice steady. "You didn't say too much. You said what was on your heart. That's nothing to apologize for." He let out a breath, a sound of profound relief. "I thought maybe I overwhelmed you." I smiled gently. "You surprised me, yes, but that's not the same thing." We sat there watching the sunlight gradually shift across the wall, slowly changing its golden angle, and then he spoke again, quieter this time, even more vulnerable. "I meant what I said, about thinking about you, about wanting to be around you." "I know," I said, my voice soft. He hesitated, searching for the precise words to convey his feelings. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I don't want you to feel like I expect anything from you. I don't know. I feel something when I'm here, something I haven't felt in a very long time." His raw honesty settled over me like a warm, comforting blanket. I took a slow, deep breath. "Mark," I said softly, "you're not making me uncomfortable. I'm just careful and a little afraid." "Afraid of what?" he asked, his brow furrowing slightly with concern. "Afraid of being hurt," I answered, my gaze meeting his. "Of wanting something I'm not supposed to want. Of people misunderstanding. Of you misunderstanding." He nodded slowly, his understanding palpable. "I don't want to hurt you, Evelyn. I'd never want that." "I know," I said, "and that's what scares me most." His brows furrowed further. "Why?" "Because it makes it harder to ignore how kind you are," I replied, my voice almost a whisper. "How good it feels to have someone look at me the way you do. I haven't had that in a very long time." He leaned in, not physically but emotionally, his voice dropping to a low, intimate tone. "Maybe you deserve to feel that again." My heart tightened. Words like that coming from a man half my age should have felt utterly ridiculous, but from him they didn't. They felt profoundly sincere. We sat in silence for a long moment, the unspoken words hanging delicately between us. Then Mark shifted slightly, turning so he could face me more fully. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice hesitant. "Go ahead. Do you ever think about letting someone in again? Letting someone be truly close to you?" My breath caught, not because I didn't know the answer, but because no one had asked me that intensely personal question in years. "Yes," I whispered, the word barely audible. "I think about it, but I don't trust those thoughts. They feel too dangerous." "What if they're not?" he asked gently, his eyes searching mine. I gave him a look, the kind that held 1,000 unspoken worries, a lifetime of caution. "And what if they are?" For a moment he didn't respond. He just watched me with that steady, unwavering gaze, the one that made me feel like the years between us were just numbers on a calendar, not an impassable canyon. Then slowly, very slowly, he reached toward my hand again. But this time he didn't physically take it. He placed his palm on the couch between us, leaving just an inch of space between his fingers and mine. "I'm not asking you for anything right now," he said, his voice soft but clear. "I just want you to know I'm here, if you want company, if you want conversation, if you want something slow, something careful, something we wouldn't have to hide or rush, something that didn't cross any boundaries your mother would throw a fit over, but still touched the parts of the heart that people stop talking about after a certain age." I looked at his hand, then at his face, seeing the honesty etched there. "Slow," I repeated softly, the word a question, a promise, a fragile hope. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Slow." So I placed my hand beside his, not touching, not claiming anything, just close enough that the warmth of his skin seeped into mine. We stayed like that, in a quiet room filled with the golden afternoon light, not saying anything else. There was no grand confession, no dramatic gesture, just two people sitting side by side, both of us carrying years of loneliness, both of us allowing the possibility, just the possibility, of something gentle and profound to exist. Later, as the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Mark stood to leave. He paused at the door, turning back to me. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said softly, a quiet promise in his voice, "to check on the chair, and maybe to check on you too." I smiled, a real smile, one that reached my eyes and crinkled the corners. "I'll be here." When the door clicked softly behind him, the apartment felt different again. Not lonely, not empty, just waiting for whatever tomorrow would bring, and for the first time in years, I felt ready for it. The following days settled into a quiet rhythm that, surprisingly, felt less like routine and more like a gentle unfolding. Mark started stopping by most mornings, sometimes with coffee from the cafe, sometimes just to say hello before work. Our conversations drifted from the weather to his day, from my memories of the neighborhood to the challenges he faced at the auto shop. He never pressured me, never pushed for more than I was comfortable giving. But his presence itself was a subtle invitation to open up, to share. The old chair became a symbol of our nascent connection. I meticulously repaired it, sanding down rough edges, re-gluing the joints, and even finding a beautiful, subtle fabric to reupholster the cracked seat. Mark would watch me work, sometimes offering to help, but mostly just sitting, listening, his quiet attention a balm to my often solitary days. He was always respectful, always kind, his gaze consistently warm and understanding. One evening, about a month after that first surprising conversation, I was putting the finishing touches on the chair. The old piece of furniture looked transformed, vibrant again, ready for a new chapter. Mark was there, of course, sitting opposite me, watching my hands. "It's beautiful, Evelyn," he said, his voice soft with genuine admiration. "You really saved it." I looked at the chair, then at him. It just needed someone to see its potential, someone to give it a little care. He nodded slowly, and then his eyes met mine, holding my gaze with that familiar, steady intensity. "I think that's true for a lot of things, isn't it?" he mused. The air between us thickened, charged with unspoken sentiment. He reached out, not for my hand this time, but for the newly upholstered armrest of the chair, his fingers brushing the fabric softly. "You know," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I think you did more than just fix this chair for me. You fixed something in me, too." My heart gave a quiet thump, a gentle echo of the hope that had been stirring within me. "And you, Mark," I replied, my voice a little husky with emotion. "You reminded me that some things aren't broken beyond repair." We sat there, simply existing in the quiet understanding that had grown between us. It wasn't a dramatic love story. It wasn't a sudden, passionate affair. It was something far more profound and enduring, a deep, respectful connection built on shared vulnerabilities, on genuine listening, and on the quiet courage to admit that loneliness was a burden neither of us had to carry alone anymore. As the days turned into weeks, and the maple tree outside my window began to shed its golden leaves, Mark's presence in my life became a natural, comforting part of my routine. He never moved into my apartment, and our relationship remained one of deep, platonic affection and profound companionship. But he was there. He was present. He was seen, and he saw me. And for Evelyn, the woman who thought her story was over, it was the most beautiful, unexpected beginning of all.